I've had you on the show before, so you're not even a newbie. You've been here before. You know how we get down. So I'm ready to ask you some deep questions about your art. But before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself and what kind of art you create?
My name is Jonathan Norton. I am a playwright, and I am currently the playwright in residence at the Dallas Theater Center.
Awesome. Awesome. Great work, by the way. Just in case you're watching this and you don't know or you're not in Dallas, when the world opens up again, you should come through here. What role do you think creatives play, and what responsibility do we have in the midst of crises such as the protest era that happened in 2020 and the pandemic of 2020?
Are we allowed to curse?
You can say all the things you want to.
There is a large part of me that just wants to say not a goddamn thing. We have no responsibility.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, I don't know, that sounds horrible. But the truth is, from a pandemic standpoint, when you consider how incredibly vulnerable artists are and have been, how incredibly vulnerable our industries have been, the very idea that, like, when you think about it, like, we were, and I come from a theater background, right? So not just theater though, it's dance and music, like the performing arts in general. We were the first to shut down, and we will likely be the last to reopen in so many different kinds of ways. And not only were we the first to shut down, but when you think about it, like, we voluntarily kind of shut down. You know what I mean? It wasn't like we were really necessarily forced to shut down, but because we're artists and our sensitivity and sense of responsibility to community is, like, felt the right thing to do. So already I felt like artists have already suffered enough to a certain extent. So, and we're continuing to suffer. So the idea that we should have to be somehow responsible for getting us through this thing sometimes feels like extra labor that seems unfair. In terms of protest, it's not that I don't think that as artists we have a responsibility to speak out and make our voices heard, but I feel like there are times when I wish there was a way that we could do it that's separate from our lives as artists, if that makes sense.
So, like, as a way to kind of like set a boundary and protect yourself.
And not even like protect ourselves, like, in a professional standpoint, but just the idea that, like, that particular work is somehow just different from the work that we've been doing as artists. I know that sounds weird, but it's like, and I'm trying to, now that I said it, I'm trying to figure out exactly how I mean that. But I guess it's somehow or another, it's like, with everything that we're dealing with in the world right now, especially as Black people, that my experience as Jonathan Norton, a black gay man, is somehow or another different from Jonathan Norton when you add artists on top of it, and that somehow or another focusing on what I need to focus on as Jonathan Norton, not the artist, seems more important.
You know, okay, so a lot of people have referenced Nina Simone's, a job of a creative is to reflect the times that they're in, and that sort of responsibility. Some of them have quoted her specifically, and then others have kind of alluded to the same
Mhm.
situation. Like our job is just kind of reflect the world that we're in. And so what you're saying is supremely contradictory to all of the others. But at the same time, I know you and your work well enough to
Mm.
know what kind of work you produce and the type of
Right.
work that you produce. And so I still have a question about that, which we will get to later. But I'm interested in how, when you're looking at your responsibility, or are you saying that you don't feel like there's a responsibility? How does that play into part as you're, because I do understand that you're compartmentalizing, right? You're saying Jonathan as a Black gay man and Jonathan as an artist are different things. They may feed into each other, but they are different things.
Right.
And that's what I think I'm understanding of you. Um, And so I guess my question is, are you saying you feel like you have a responsibility to like honor those two sides of you separately, or like how do you reconcile those two very separate parts of you when they so very often collide?
But this idea of self-care,
Mhm.
and that long as artists, um, particularly as Black artists, African American artists, or BIPOC artists, or however you want to describe it, um, sometimes it feels like you've been on this kind of hamster, or it's a wheel and a
Mm,
hamster in the wheel or whatever, for
yeah.
so long, that I have felt like having to be careful about how I bring those two things together,
Hmm.
because sometimes, um, the joining of those two things, um, has caused harm, like personally, has
Yeah.
caused harm, and just not acknowledging the times that I just have to be gentle with myself.
Hmm.
There's this playwright. His name is Danya Love. He's a New York-based playwright, but he's from uh, Philadelphia, actually. And he always talks about this idea of like of Black people being soft with themselves and learning to be soft and to take care of yourself and care for yourself. And so I think there are often times when I felt like joining those two things have just caused additional worry or burden in a way that isn't always necessary or useful. There are times when, um, I mean, of course, it can have a purpose,
Hmm.
but I also think that in the things that we're living through right now, um, and I said this at the beginning, it's funny, I said this at the beginning of the pandemic and the shutdown, and I really quickly forgot it. And now talking to you, I'm remembering it again. But I often think that we take for granted, um, what we need to keep in reserve,
Mm,
because um, because there will come a time in the next few months, in the next year, or what have you, as our lives, quote unquote, begin to go back to normal.
mhm.
Um, but we've spent uh, so much extra energy in these last few months that we're not even necessarily aware of, right? And
Mhm.
so just trying to be like careful and gentle with ourselves, so that as we begin to ease back into what normalcy looks like, and still dealing with all the shit that we have to deal with,
Mhm.
that we're going to need. I don't want to use up things that I shouldn't use up too soon,
Yeah.
if
So
that makes sense.
it does. So it sounds like kind of what you're saying in terms of like a responsibility. It's a responsibility to yourself as a
Right.
creative, not necessarily a responsibility that you have to the world.
Right.
Is in order to give back to the world, you also have to self-care. It's kind of
Yeah.
what it sounds like you're saying. Okay. No, I like that. And honestly, we could have used that lesson about, we could use that lesson a few minutes ago. Just gonna put that in my pocket and move on. So I want to go back just very briefly to Penny Candy, because it was about the Black experience,
Right.
and you have been talking about boundaries, and these are clearly, from the way that you're talking, it doesn't sound like these are new concepts. These are things that you've visited and maybe had to revisit, but
Right.
they're not new concepts to you. And so I just want to go back a little bit and talk about the process of creating something like Penny Candy that was about the Black experience when there wasn't a pandemic, and then there wasn't the George Floyd and the Ahmaud Arbery's and the Breonna Taylors that were happening at the same time, and the concept of creating maybe something similar now. Like, what does that look like? What would that look like for you?
I think I would be a lot more vigilant in terms of conversations around the play, the promotion of it,
Mm-hmm.
issues related to marketing. Not that I think that there was anything like horrible that happened, but I do think that I had very myself and my director, Derek Sanders, we
Mm-hmm.
had very particular idea of how we wanted the conversation about Penny Candy to evolve, and
Mm-hmm.
how we wanted to share the story of the play with audiences even prior to the play opening or rolling out. You know what I mean? There's something very dear to us about controlling the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that at a certain point, I think we got lax about some things. Um, and I don't think that we would be as lax about it. I know I certainly would not have been um, as laxed about it. Here's the thing. Like, I remember early marketing conversations that we had. I'm talking about marketing now. It's so weird. But like early marketing conversations we had, we really focused, myself and Derek, we really focused a lot on this idea of nostalgia and Black nostalgia, and just that feel good sense of like being able to somehow to relive a part of your life, your childhood, relive the 80s and like some really awesome aspects of the 80s for Black
Yeah.
folks, do you know what I mean? And finding ways to celebrate that.
Yeah.
And that is kind of a way in which we wanted to like lead into the conversation of the play, to
Right.
have like the juxtaposition of that to perhaps what things became. So
So
it was,
tell everybody where they can find you, your art, and where to find you.
I have a website, www. It's nortonscriptworks.com. And I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, but I don't really know how to use this. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. I don't know how to use them too
That's
much,
fair.
very much.
Totally fair.
But I'm on them. I have presence.
Found.
I just don't use it.
I like it.
But I'm really active on Facebook, even though I'm told like, you know, people are probably stealing my identity and my information on Facebook.
I like it.
But I'm still
Well,
there.
I'm so glad to have
This
you, and
point.
thank you so much. I feel like I got some gems. I was like, dang,
like really,
why
like
didn't I have
what
this
they do?
conversation with
Like
him
you want to
earlier?
steal my
I could have
identity? Are you
used this boundary compartmentalization talk a little bit earlier. Like, what's happening? So I am super grateful to you. Thank you so much. And for everybody else, thanks for joining us. Go find him.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks,
So.
Chanel.
All righty.